I was sitting in a cramped library in Edinburgh, Scotland, surrounded by textbooks on international business law, when my phone buzzed with a message that would unravel everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. The notification lit up my screen with my Uncle Richard's name, and I remember thinking it was probably just another forwarded meme or a check-in about how my semester was going. I was 22 years old, halfway through my junior year abroad, living on instant ramen and the kind of determination that comes from being the first person in your immediate family to make it this far in college. My grandmother, Nana Claire, had made it all possible with the fund she'd set aside for me before she passed when I was 17. That money wasn't just cash in an account, it was her belief in me, wrapped up in every dollar she'd saved while working double shifts at the hospital laundry for 30 years. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world right now, drop a comment and let me know where you are. And if you've ever had someone you trusted with everything turn around and destroy that trust, you're going to want to hear what happened next. Make sure you check the description box below for more stories like this, because what I'm about to tell you, you won't believe until you hear it all. The text was short, brutally short. Need to talk to you about the college fund. I withdrew it. Your cousin Tyler needed it more. He's actually going somewhere in life. Hope you understand. This is what's best for the family. I read it 3 times before my brain could actually process the words. Withdrew it. My college fund. The money Nana Claire had left specifically for me, in a will that had been read aloud in a lawyer's office, with my name written clear as day. Tyler, my cousin, Uncle Richard's golden child who'd spent the last 4 years partying through community college and changing majors like he changed socks, needed it more than I did. The library suddenly felt airless. Students around me were typing away on laptops, whispering in study groups, completely unaware that my entire world had just collapsed through a text message. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call him immediately and demand answers. I wanted to get on the next flight home and storm into his house and ask him how he could do this to me, to Nana's memory. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was the years of watching how my uncle operated, always smooth-talking his way through family gatherings, always positioning himself as the reasonable one, the successful one, the one who knew what was best for everyone. I sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, staring at that message. The rage built slowly, like water coming to a boil. Uncle Richard had been the executor of Nana's estate. She trusted him with that responsibility because he was her oldest child, her son who'd gone to business school and made something of himself in real estate. He'd always treated me kindly enough at family functions, asking about my grades, telling me how proud Nana would have been. But there was always this edge to it, this subtle comparison to Tyler, who was 2 years older than me and had somehow remained the family favorite despite accomplishing virtually nothing. My mom, Richard's younger sister, had died when I was 12, car accident on a rainy Tuesday morning. After that, I'd gone to live with my dad, who did his best but struggled with depression and could barely keep our small apartment together. Nana had been my lifeline. She'd paid for my SAT prep courses. She'd helped me apply to colleges. She told me, over and over, that education was the one thing no one could ever take away from me. And when she got sick during my senior year of high school, she'd made sure that fund was legally protected for my college expenses. Or so I thought. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you considered family, you know exactly how I felt in that moment. It wasn't just anger. It was the sick, hollow feeling in your chest, like someone had reached in and pulled out something vital. I kept thinking about all the times I'd thanked Uncle Richard for managing the fund, for making sure the payments went through to my university each semester. He'd always waved it off, told me it was no trouble, that he was happy to help. And all along, he'd been planning this. The worst part, Tyler didn't even need the money. Uncle Richard owned 3 rental properties and a vacation home in Lake Tahoe. His wife, Aunt Diane, drove a brand-new Lexus. They weren't struggling. But Tyler had apparently decided he wanted to transfer to some private university in California to study film production, his 5th major in 4 years. And suddenly that was more important than the degree I was working my ass off to earn in Scotland, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while working part-time at a bookshop just to afford groceries. I finally responded to his text. My fingers felt numb as I typed. I understand. Take care. 5 words. Calm. Measured. No emotion. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Within seconds, I saw the read receipt pop up. Then 3 dots appeared as he typed back. Glad you're being mature about this. Tyler's going places. You'll be fine. You're resourceful. That word. Resourceful. Like I was some stray cat who'd figure out how to survive, because that's just what I did. But here's what Uncle Richard didn't know. Here's what he couldn't have possibly anticipated in his smug, self-satisfied calculations about who deserved what in our family. 2 years earlier, when I turned 20 and Nana's estate was being finalized, I'd received my own copies of all the documentation. Every single page. I'd kept them in a folder in my apartment back home, never thinking I'd need them. I was majoring in business law because I'd watched Nana get taken advantage of by contracts she didn't understand, by creditors who used legal jargon to confuse elderly patients at the hospital where she worked. I'd promised myself I'd learn how the system worked so I could protect people like her. And in those documents was something Uncle Richard had apparently forgotten about, or assumed I'd never bothered to read. A clause. A very specific clause about the conditions under which the executor could make changes to the distribution of the fund. It required written consent from the beneficiary, me, and documentation of extreme financial hardship that would legally justify redirecting the funds. Without those things, any withdrawal was breach of fiduciary duty, potentially even theft. I closed my textbooks. My hands had stopped shaking. The rage was still there, burning hot and bright, but it had transformed into something else. Something colder. More focused. I pulled out my laptop and opened my email. I had 6 months left in Scotland. 6 months before I was supposed to return home for my senior year. 6 months to figure out exactly how to make Uncle Richard understand the magnitude of his mistake. Because that's the thing about being underestimated your entire life. That's the thing about being the kid who lost her mom, who struggled financially, who had to work twice as hard as her cousin for half the recognition. You learn how to be patient. You learn how to plan. You learn how to wait for exactly the right moment to show people who you really are. I started making a list. Every email Uncle Richard had ever sent me about the fund. Every bank statement I'd saved. Every conversation we'd had where he'd confirmed the money was specifically designated for my education and my education only. I had receipts for everything, literally and figuratively. And I'd spent 2.5 years studying contract law, trust administration, and fiduciary responsibility in one of the best business programs in Europe. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Uncle Richard. Tyler says thanks, by the way. He's excited about USC. Thought you'd want to know the money's going to good use. I stared at those words. USC, the University of Southern California. Tuition there was over $60,000 a year. Nana's fund had been worth about $90,000 total, enough for my state school education with some left over. Tyler was going to burn through it in less than 2 years, probably partying his way through film school before dropping out to find himself, or whatever his latest excuse would be. But I simply replied again, that's great. Happy for him. Because the worst thing I could do right now was show my hand. The worst thing I could do was let Uncle Richard know that I wasn't just going to roll over and accept this. He wanted me to be the good niece, the understanding one, the one who didn't make waves because I was just so grateful for whatever scraps the family threw my way. What he was about to learn was that gratitude and calculation can look exactly the same from the outside. And by the time he realized the difference, it would be far too late to undo what he'd set in motion. I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I was going to dismantle everything he'd built, piece by careful piece, using the very same legal knowledge that Nana's money had helped me acquire. And he wasn't going to see it coming until the damage was already done. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in restraint. Every fiber of my being wanted to confront Uncle Richard immediately, to call him out publicly, to tell every single family member what he'd done. But I knew that impulse would be my downfall. People like my uncle, people who operated with that kind of casual cruelty disguised as family wisdom, they were experts at controlling narratives. If I came at him with raw emotion, he'd paint me as ungrateful, dramatic, unable to see the bigger picture. He'd make Tyler the victim somehow, the kid who just wanted a chance at his dreams. He twisted until I was the selfish one for not understanding that family means sacrifice. So instead, I did something much smarter. I went completely silent. No more responses to his texts. No calls. No emails. When Aunt Diane texted me asking how my semester was going, I sent brief, polite replies with no mention of the fund. When Tyler posted pictures on social media of his acceptance to USC, showing off his new Trojan gear, I didn't comment. I didn't like the posts. I didn't engage at all. I became a ghost in the family dynamic, present enough that my absence didn't raise alarms, but distant enough that they stopped thinking about me altogether. That's exactly what I wanted. During those weeks, I spent every spare moment building my case. I connected with one of my professors, Dr. Helena Morrison, who specialized in estate law and had practiced in California before moving to teach in Edinburgh. I didn't tell her the full story at first, just asked hypothetical questions about executor responsibilities, about what constituted breach of fiduciary duty, about the legal remedies available when someone mismanaged a trust. She was generous with her knowledge, probably thinking I was just an eager student preparing for exams. She had no idea she was helping me construct a legal trap that would catch my uncle by surprise. Here's what I learned. Uncle Richard had made several critical mistakes. First, the fund wasn't just a casual inheritance. It was structured as an educational trust with specific terms. Nana had worked with a lawyer to set it up that way specifically to protect it from being used for anything other than my college expenses. Second, as executor and trustee, Richard had a legal obligation to act solely in my interest regarding that trust. Taking money meant for me and giving it to Tyler, no matter what his reasoning, was a direct violation of that obligation. Third, the moment he withdrew that money without my written consent and proper legal justification, he committed what California law would consider embezzlement from a trust. The penalties for that? They weren't small. Criminal charges were possible. Civil liability was certain. He could be forced to repay every penny with interest. He could lose his real estate license. His reputation in the business community could be destroyed. And if I played this right, it would all happen before he had any chance to fix it. But I needed to be smart about timing. Tyler hadn't started at USC yet. That wouldn't happen until the fall semester, still 4 months away. The money was probably sitting in a new account right now, maybe earning interest, waiting to be spent on Tyler's tuition and expenses. If I moved too quickly, Uncle Richard might panic and try to return the money, claim it was all a misunderstanding, make it disappear before I could build a proper case. I needed him to actually spend it. I needed the violation to be so complete, so documented, that there would be no way to argue his way out of it. If you're watching this and thinking I should have just confronted him like a normal person, I need you to understand something. This wasn't about the money. I mean, yes, I needed that money desperately. My student loans were already crushing, and without the fund, I was looking at tens of thousands more in debt. But this was about something deeper. This was about being invisible my entire life, about watching my cousin coast on charm and last names while I fought for every opportunity, about having my grandmother's final gift, her last act of love for me, stolen by someone who thought I was too weak, too powerless, too insignificant to fight back. I was going to show him exactly how wrong he was. And if you're enjoying the story so far, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what happened next is going to blow your mind. Check the description box for more stories like this. Trust me, you won't want to miss them. The breakthrough came in late March, about 6 weeks after the initial text. I was scrolling through Facebook during a study break when I saw Aunt Diane's post. Photos of Tyler touring the USC campus, beaming in front of the film school building, holding a check, an actual physical check made out to the university. The caption read, "So proud of our boy. First tuition payment sent. Dreams really do come true when you have family who believes in you." Red heart, clapperboard, the check was partially visible in the photo. I zoomed in. $42,000. My $42,000. And she posted it publicly for everyone to see. I screenshot everything. The post. The comments from family members congratulating them. Uncle Richard's reply. Anything for our son. This is what Claire would have wanted, investing in the family's future. That last line made my blood boil. What Claire would have wanted. He was using my dead grandmother's name to justify stealing from me. But the anger was useful now. It sharpened my focus. I sent the screenshots to Dr. Morrison, finally explaining the full situation. She was silent for a long moment when we met in her office the next day. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Your uncle has made a catastrophic error. He's not just violated the trust terms, he's essentially announced the crime on social media. This is going to be easier than I thought." She helped me draft the first letter. Not to Uncle Richard, that would come later. This one went to the California Probate Court, formally requesting an accounting of the educational trust established by Claire Elizabeth Brennan, deceased. As the beneficiary, I had every legal right to demand full transparency about how the funds had been managed. The request was framed as routine, almost bureaucratic. Nothing in it suggested I knew about the theft. Nothing in it revealed my intentions. It simply asked for documentation of all transactions related to the trust over the past 5 years. Uncle Richard would receive a copy of that request, and he'd have 30 days to provide the accounting, which meant he'd have 30 days to realize that the documentation would show exactly what he'd done: the unauthorized withdrawal, the transfer to Tyler, all of it in black and white. 30 days to panic. 30 days to realize he'd been caught. But here's the beautiful part. By the time he received that letter, it would be too late. Because 3 days before I sent the probate court request, I sent another letter, this one to the California State Bar Association. Uncle Richard wasn't just a real estate investor. He was also a licensed real estate broker. And real estate brokers in California are held to fiduciary standards when handling other people's money. They can lose their licenses for financial misconduct, especially when it involves family members or trust funds. I filed a formal complaint attaching every piece of documentation I had, every email, every bank statement, every text message. The Bar Association doesn't play around. Once a complaint is filed, they investigate. They contact other agencies. They create a paper trail that follows you. Even if Uncle Richard tried to return the money immediately, the complaint would remain on his record. The investigation would proceed. And in California's tight-knit real estate community, word spreads fast about agents under investigation. I sent the letters on a Wednesday morning. By Friday, I'd received confirmation that both had been received and were being processed. I imagined Uncle Richard checking his mail that weekend, seeing the probate court envelope, opening it with casual curiosity that would transform into horror as he read the contents. I imagined him calling his lawyer, trying to figure out how his resourceful niece had managed to outmaneuver him from 4,000 miles away. But I still wasn't done. The third piece of my plan was the most satisfying. I contacted Tyler directly. Not with anger, with concern. I sent him a long email explaining that I'd discovered some irregularities with Nana's trust fund, that I was working with lawyers to sort it out, and that I was worried he might be caught in the middle. I told him I didn't blame him. He was just excited about college, just like I'd been. But I wanted him to know that the money he'd received might need to be returned, that there could be legal complications, and that he should probably talk to his own lawyer, separate from his father. I copied Aunt Diane on the email. Tyler's response came within hours. Panicked. Confused. He'd had no idea the money was supposed to be mine. His dad had told him it was family money, available for whoever needed it most. He was devastated. He said he'd talk to his parents immediately. And just like that, I'd created a crack in the family unit. Tyler wasn't the enemy here. He was a spoiled, directionless kid who'd been handed everything his whole life. But he wasn't malicious. And now he was questioning his father's honesty for probably the first time ever. The next week, my phone rang. Uncle Richard. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. On the third try, he left a message. His voice was tight, strained, nothing like the casual confidence from his original text. We need to talk about this misunderstanding with the trust. I think there's been some confusion about the terms. Call me back as soon as you can. This is important. Misunderstanding. Confusion. The classic playbook of someone who'd been caught. I didn't call back. Instead, I sent one text. All communication regarding the trust should go through my legal representative. Her contact information is attached. I'd arranged with Dr. Morrison to have one of her lawyer colleagues in California represent me. Someone Uncle Richard couldn't charm or intimidate. Someone who understood exactly what we were doing. The pieces were falling into place. The probate court would demand his accounting. The Bar Association would investigate the complaint. Tyler would pressure him about the truth. And through it all, I'd remain in Scotland, seemingly powerless, the niece who'd said, "I understand," and disappeared. But when he discovered what I'd already set in motion, when he realized that every move he made now would only dig him deeper, the damage would be done. And there wouldn't be a thing he could do to stop it. April came to Scotland with the kind of gray, misty rain that seeps into your bones, but I barely noticed. I was too busy watching my uncle's world collapse from across the Atlantic, one documented misstep at a time. The accounting he submitted to the probate court was a disaster, rushed, incomplete, filled with vague descriptions that couldn't hide what he'd actually done. My lawyer in California, Rebecca Chin, tore it apart in her response. She highlighted every discrepancy, every missing explanation, every point where Uncle Richard had violated his fiduciary duty. The court ordered a formal hearing for June. Meanwhile, the State Bar investigation was moving forward. They'd contacted the bank where the trust had been held. They'd requested Richard's real estate transaction records for the past 3 years. They were building their own case, independent of mine. Once those wheels start turning, they don't stop. Uncle Richard was about to learn that lesson the hardest way possible. But the family fallout? That was almost worse than the legal consequences, at least from where I was sitting. Tyler had confronted his parents, and according to my cousin Sarah, Richard's daughter from his first marriage, who'd never liked how he treated me, the argument had been explosive. Tyler had called his father a liar and a thief. He threatened to drop out of USC entirely rather than attend on stolen money. Aunt Diane had tried to defend Richard at first, but even she couldn't justify what he'd done once she saw the actual trust documents. Sarah had been texting me regular updates. She'd always been different from the rest of that side of the family, more aware, more willing to call out injustice. She told me that Uncle Richard had tried to paint me as vindictive, that I was ruining the family over money that wasn't that significant in the grand scheme of things. But nobody was buying it. How do you spin stealing your dead mother's gift to her granddaughter? How do you make that sound reasonable? The cracks in Richard's perfect family image were spreading fast. His business partners had caught wind of the bar complaint. In real estate, reputation is everything, and being under investigation for trust fund theft isn't exactly great for business. 2 of his colleagues had quietly distanced themselves from joint ventures they'd been planning. His church, where he'd been a deacon for 15 years, where he built so much of his social capital, had started asking questions about his ethics. Everything he'd built on the foundation of appearing trustworthy and successful was crumbling. And I hadn't even filed the civil lawsuit yet. That came in early May. Rebecca filed on my behalf in California Superior Court, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of trust assets, emotional distress, and punitive damages. We weren't asking for just the $90,000. We were asking for treble damages, 3 times the amount, plus attorney fees, plus interest, plus punitive damages that could run into 6 figures. In California, when you violate a trust, the courts don't mess around. The lawsuit became public record. It hit the legal news blogs. Someone from our hometown newspaper picked it up. Small-town story about prominent real estate broker accused of stealing from orphan niece. The headline read, "Local broker faces legal action over misappropriated college fund." Within 24 hours, it was the talk of our town. My phone exploded with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Some supported me. Others accused me of destroying the family over a misunderstanding that could have been resolved privately. But I noticed that the harshest critics were the ones who'd always benefited from Uncle Richard's generosity, who'd gotten jobs through his connections, who'd been invited to his lake house parties. They had a vested interest in maintaining his reputation. The ones who'd been overlooked like me? They were thrilled. Aunt Patricia, my mom's youngest sister, called me one night. She was crying. "I've been waiting 20 years for someone to stand up to Richard," she said. "He's always been like this. Always thought he knew better than everyone else. Always treated your mom like she wasn't as important because she didn't have his education or his money. I'm so proud of you for fighting back. Your mom would be proud too." That phone call broke something open in me. I'd been operating on pure strategic calculation for months, treating this like a chess game where emotion was a liability. But hearing my aunt's voice, hearing her connect what I was doing to my mom's memory, reminded me why I'd started this. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about refusing to be erased. About refusing to let people like Uncle Richard decide who mattered and who didn't in our family. I thought I'd feel triumphant, watching everything unfold exactly as I'd planned. But mostly I felt tired and sad, because this was my family, broken and fighting, and even though Richard had started it, I was the one who'd escalated it beyond repair. The hearing in probate court happened on a Thursday morning in mid-June. I'd flown back to California the week before, staying with Aunt Patricia instead of anywhere near Uncle Richard. Rebecca had prepared me thoroughly, but nothing quite captures the surreality of sitting in a courtroom, watching your uncle squirm on the witness stand as a judge asks him to explain why he thought he had the right to redirect your inheritance. His lawyer tried every angle. They argued that Nana had expressed verbal wishes that the money should be flexible for family needs. They argued that I was doing fine in Scotland without the money. They argued that Tyler's opportunities were time-sensitive. They even tried to argue that I'd consented by sending that initial text saying, "I understand." Rebecca destroyed every argument. She had Nana's written trust document, explicit and clear. She had my financial records, showing I absolutely was not doing fine and had taken on substantial debt. She had Uncle Richard's own text messages admitting he'd made the decision unilaterally. And she had legal precedent showing that "I understand" does not constitute legal consent of violated trust. The judge was not sympathetic to Richard at all. "Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice sharp, "you are a sophisticated businessman with real estate credentials that require understanding fiduciary responsibility. You were entrusted with managing a fund specifically designated for your niece's education. The trust document is unambiguous. You do not have discretion to redirect those funds to your son simply because you believe he needs them more. That's called theft." Uncle Richard's face went white. I watched from my seat, feeling that same cold focus I'd maintained for months. No satisfaction, no glee, just the grim acknowledgement that we'd reached the inevitable conclusion of his choices. The judge ordered him to return the full amount within 30 days, plus interest calculated from the date of withdrawal. She also ordered him to pay my legal fees and referred the matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. The Bar Association investigation would proceed independently, but this judgment wouldn't help his case there. When it was over, we stood in the courthouse hallway. Uncle Richard tried to approach me, but Rebecca stepped between us. "My client has nothing to say to you," she said firmly. He looked at me over her shoulder, his expression somewhere between fury and desperation. "You've ruined me," he said quietly. "Over money. You've destroyed our family over money." And that's when I finally spoke directly to him for the first time in months. "No," I said, my voice steady. "You ruined yourself. You stole from me. You disrespected Nana's wishes. You treated me like I didn't matter. I just made sure there were consequences. That's not destruction, that's accountability." He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. What could he say? He gambled that I was too weak, too far away, too intimidated by his authority to fight back. He'd lost that bet spectacularly. As I walked out of the courthouse into the California sunshine, I felt something shift inside me. The anger that had sustained me for months was finally starting to fade. In its place was something more complex, grief for the family relationships that wouldn't recover from this, relief that the fight was finally over, and a strange kind of pride that I'd stood up for myself when it mattered most. But there was still one more piece to resolve. The money would be returned, yes. The legal victory was mine. But the real question was, what happened next? How do you move forward when you've won the battle but lost the peace? The money hit my account on a Tuesday morning in late July, exactly one day before the court deadline. $93,412, the original amount plus interest, minus the portion Tyler had already spent on USC's first tuition payment, which Uncle Richard had to cover out of his own pocket. It should have felt victorious. Instead, I just stared at the number on my screen, feeling oddly empty. I'd spent the past 2 months back in the States, finishing my junior year remotely and preparing to return to school in California for my senior year. The university had been understanding about the situation, allowing me to complete my Scotland program early given the circumstances. But everything felt different now. I'd left for Edinburgh as this optimistic kid who believed in working hard and trusting family. I was coming back as someone who understood that sometimes the people you trust most are capable of hurting you in ways you never imagined. The family situation was exactly as fractured as you'd expect. Uncle Richard and I didn't speak. Aunt Diane sent me one email, long, rambling, defensive, explaining how difficult this had been for their family, how Tyler was devastated and considering taking a gap year, how Richard's business had suffered. She never quite apologized, but she acknowledged that mistakes were made. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Tyler, surprisingly, reached out himself. We met for coffee in August, right before he was supposed to start at USC. He looked different, older somehow, less cocky. He apologized. Really apologized, not the performative kind people do to make themselves feel better. He said he'd been blind to his privilege his whole life, that he'd never realized how much harder everything was for me, that his dad had always told him he deserved things without explaining where they came from. I'm not going to USC, he told me. Not on that money. I'm going to community college this year, working part-time, figuring out what I actually want instead of just taking whatever Dad hands me. I don't want to be the person who benefits from hurting you. I don't want to be him. That conversation shifted something for me. Tyler was still figuring things out, still sheltered in ways he didn't fully understand. But he was trying. He was the only one in that immediate family who'd looked at the situation and decided to change rather than defend. Sarah, Richard's daughter, became one of my closest allies through all of this. She testified at the hearing, confirming things she'd heard her father say about the trust over the years. She cut ties with him entirely after he tried to pressure her to talk sense into me. We started having regular dinners, building the kind of cousin relationship I'd always wanted but never had with Tyler. The state bar investigation concluded in September. Uncle Richard received a 6-month suspension of his real estate license and was placed on probation for 3 years following reinstatement. He'd have to complete ethics training and submit to random audits of any transactions involving family members or trust funds. It was a significant penalty, one that essentially ended his career as a top broker in our area. Word spread. Clients left. His reputation never recovered. I wish I could say I felt nothing but satisfaction about that. The truth is more complicated. Yes, he deserved consequences. Yes, he brought it on himself. But watching someone's life unravel, even someone who'd hurt me, wasn't as satisfying as I'd imagined during those angry nights in Edinburgh. It was just sad. It was the sad reality of what happens when someone's ego and sense of entitlement override their basic decency. The criminal prosecution didn't move forward. The district attorney's office decided that since the money had been returned and it was a family matter, criminal charges weren't in the public interest. Part of me was relieved. I'd never wanted Richard in jail, just wanted accountability. But part of me worried that without criminal consequences, he'd never truly understand the severity of what he'd done. I used the returned money exactly as Nana had intended. I paid off my student loans from Scotland. I covered my senior year tuition and housing. I bought textbooks without having to choose between eating and studying. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't constantly calculating dollars and cents, wasn't skipping meals to make rent, wasn't lying awake at night worried about how I'd afford next semester. And you know what? Nana was right. Education is the one thing no one can take from you. I graduated summa cum laude that May with a degree in business law and a job offer from a firm in San Francisco specializing in estate planning and elder law. I'd found my calling in protecting people like Nana from being taken advantage of, and the path to that calling had been paved by her gift, even if I'd had to fight to keep it. The years that followed brought their own complications. I changed my last name legally, took my mom's maiden name, Sullivan, instead of keeping the Brennan name I shared with Richard. Some family members saw it as petty. I saw it as necessary. I needed to define myself outside of that toxicity. I stayed close with Sarah, with Aunt Patricia, with Tyler as he slowly grew into a more self-aware person. I learned that family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up for you, who chooses you, who sees your worth even when you're struggling to see it yourself. Uncle Richard and I crossed paths once, about 3 years after the hearing. It was at Aunt Patricia's daughter's wedding. We were both invited, both attended, both tried to avoid each other. But at one point, we ended up near each other at the bar. The silence was heavy. "I never meant to hurt you," he said finally, not looking at me. "I thought I was doing what was best for my son. I thought you'd be okay." I considered his words carefully before responding. "The problem, Richard, is that you thought about what was best for Tyler, but you never thought about what was best for me. You never even considered me. That's what hurt more than the money, realizing I was so invisible to you that you could steal my future and sleep just fine." He had no response to that. What could he say? We stood there for another moment before I walked away. I didn't need his apology anymore. I didn't need his acknowledgement. I'd learned that closure doesn't come from the people who hurt you. It comes from refusing to let their actions define you. Now, years later, when people ask me if I regret how I handled it, if I wish I'd been more forgiving, if I think I went too far, I tell them this: forgiveness doesn't mean accepting injustice. It doesn't mean letting people face no consequences for their actions. I forgave Uncle Richard in the sense that I don't carry anger toward him anymore. But I didn't let him get away with it. Those are two different things. I learned that sometimes being kind to yourself means being absolutely ruthless with people who try to take advantage of that kindness. I learned that strategic patience is more powerful than reactive anger. I learned that the people who call you vindictive for demanding accountability are usually the people benefiting from the lack of it. Most importantly, I learned that Nana's gift wasn't just the money, it was the belief that I was worth investing in. And by fighting for that gift, by refusing to let it be taken, I honored her memory more than any amount of family peacekeeping ever could have. If you stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. If you've ever been in a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself, I hope my story gives you permission to choose yourself. We're taught that family is everything, that forgiveness means forgetting, that being the bigger person means swallowing injustice. But sometimes being the bigger person means standing tall enough that people can't look down on you anymore. The college fund that Uncle Richard tried to steal didn't just pay for my education. It taught me the most valuable lesson I've ever learned. It taught me that you can be kind without being weak. You can be forgiving without being a doormat. You can love your family while refusing to let them destroy you. I think about Nana sometimes, wonder what she would have thought about everything that happened. Part of me thinks she would have been heartbroken to see the family fractured. But another part, the part that knew her fierce determination, that remembered how she worked those double shifts and never complained, that recalled the steel in her voice when she told me to never let anyone make me feel small, that part thinks she would have been proud. She gave me that money to build my future. I fought for it. I won. And then I used it exactly as she'd hoped, to become someone who could stand on her own and help others do the same. Tyler ended up doing okay, by the way. He spent 2 years at community college, worked in retail management, and eventually went back to school for business administration. He graduated last year, got a job at a nonprofit that helps low-income students access college resources. He told me once that watching what happened with the fund changed his entire perspective on privilege and responsibility. He said he's trying to be better than what his father taught him to be. I believe him. People can change if they're willing to do the work. Uncle Richard never really recovered professionally. He does property management now, smaller scale stuff, nothing like the empire he built before. We don't have a relationship. I don't think we ever will. And I've made peace with that. Some bridges, once burned, aren't meant to be rebuilt. The ash fertilizes new ground. My career took off in ways I never expected. That firm in San Francisco led to bigger opportunities. I spent 5 years there, then moved to a position with the State Attorney General's office working specifically on elder financial abuse cases. Every time I helped someone recover funds that were stolen by a caretaker, a family member, or a predatory financial advisor, I think about Nana. I think about how many people out there don't have someone willing to fight for them the way I fought for myself. So I fight for them instead. I also volunteer with a legal aid clinic that helps college students navigate financial disputes with family members. You'd be surprised how common it is. Parents or relatives who control college funds and use them as leverage, who make promises and then break them, who steal from kids who are trying to build futures. I help them understand their rights. I help them fight back when necessary. And I tell them the same thing I learned. Documentation is everything, patience is power, and you are worth fighting for. There's a photo I keep on my desk at work. It's Nana and me at my high school graduation. She's wearing this bright purple dress, her favorite color, and her arm is around my shoulders. We're both smiling, but her eyes have this look in them, this fierce pride mixed with something else. I think it was hope. Hope that I'd make it. Hope that the sacrifices she made would mean something. Hope that I'd be okay. I keep that photo where I can see it every day because it reminds me why I do this work. It reminds me that someone believed in me when I had very little reason to believe in myself. And it reminds me that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. Taking the pain someone caused you and turning it into purpose. Taking the injustice you experienced and using it to prevent injustice for others. If you're going through something similar right now, if someone you trusted has betrayed you, if you're wondering whether it's worth fighting back, if you're scared that standing up for yourself will cost you relationships you value, I want you to hear this: you matter. Your boundaries matter. Your future matters. And the people who truly love you will respect those things, even when it's uncomfortable. The ones who ask you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm, they were never really in your corner to begin with. I won't lie and say the path I chose was easy. It wasn't. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was making the right choice. There were family holidays I spent alone. There were cousins who stopped talking to me because I'd made things awkward by demanding accountability. The cost of justice is sometimes isolation, but the cost of silence is losing yourself entirely. And I'd rather be alone and whole than surrounded by people who require me to be broken. These days, I'm 38 years old. I have a career I love, relationships I've chosen, a life I've built on my own terms. I still think about that text message Uncle Richard sent. I withdrew the college fund your grandmother left you. Your cousin needed it more, and sometimes I still feel that initial shock, that moment when the ground dropped out from under me. But then I remember what came next. I remember the calm I felt when I responded, I understand. Take care. I remember the cold precision of building my case. I remember the look on his face when he realized what I'd set in motion. And I remember the most important part. I remember that I fought for myself when it mattered most, and I won. That text message was meant to break me. Instead, it forged me into someone stronger than Uncle Richard ever imagined possible. Someone who understands that justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes it's justice perfected. Someone who knows that the best revenge is living well, succeeding loudly, and making damn sure that no one ever underestimates you twice. So to anyone watching this who's struggling with their own version of this story, who's trying to decide whether to fight or fold, who's wondering if they have the strength to stand up to someone more powerful, you do. You absolutely do. Start documenting everything. Learn your rights. Build your case. Be patient. Be strategic. And when the moment comes, strike with precision. Because the people who bet against you, they deserve to lose that bet. And you deserve to prove them wrong. If this story resonated with you, if it helped you feel less alone in your own struggles, or if it gave you the courage to stand up for yourself, drop a comment below and let me know. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your story if you feel comfortable sharing it. And please, hit that subscribe button and check the description box below for more stories like this. Stories about ordinary people who refuse to accept injustice. Stories about the power of patience and planning. Stories about how the people who underestimate you always regret it in the end. My name is Catherine Sullivan. I was supposed to be invisible. I was supposed to say I understand and disappear. I was supposed to let my uncle steal my future and be grateful for whatever scraps I could earn on my own. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I did something better. I made him understand that the quiet ones aren't weak. We're just waiting for the right moment to remind you exactly who you're dealing with. And by the time he figured that out, the damage was already done. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps you write your own ending, whatever that looks like. Because you deserve an ending where you win. Where you matter. Where the people who try to erase, you learn that some of us refuse to be erased. Now go check that description box for more stories like this one. Trust me, you won't regret it.